Well, thank you, and it's a great honor to be with you and to be part of this great celebration of the contribution of Mr. Nakanishi. It is wonderful to be here. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a map that every business minister should be familiar with. It's a map of the world on which a circle is drawn, encompassing most of East Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. That's a big chunk of the world's landmass, approximately 1/6 of the total. But here's the point of the map. More people live inside the circle than outside it. 1/6 of the Earth contains more than half of its population. So to disregard Asia is to ignore most of the world. For understandable reasons, British politics has been focused on Europe this year. And next week, I dare say, our eyes will be focused on America, perhaps even glued to America. But as important as these places and their people are, let's not forget that the larger part of humanity is Asian. And that's why the work of Asia House is of such value. Your mission to promote engagement between Europe and Asia is always relevant and becomes more so with each passing year. Since becoming business secretary in July, I've made 3 overseas ministerial visits, all of them to Asia. I've been asked if this is part of some special initiative, and I say no. There should be nothing special about a business minister from the West heading east. In fact, it should be seen as an entirely normal part of doing business with the world. After all, Asia is where most of the world lives and works. That said, proximity matters. In a world of instant electronic communication, real objects, and indeed real people, are still subject to the limitations of time and distance. Which is why, as a government, we attach the utmost importance to Britain's relationship with our closest neighbours too. In June, the country voted to leave the European Union, and the democratic will of the British people must be respected. Nevertheless, we are determined to maintain the closest possible trading arrangements with the rest of Europe. Furthermore, throughout the process of negotiating those arrangements and those agreements, we will represent the interests of British business and of the global businesses that invest in Britain. So does this argue in favour of hard or soft Brexit? Well, the answer is neither. The only way forward is smart Brexit, to begin with a recognition that the divisions on this issue are not as deep as is sometimes portrayed. As some people here know, I campaigned on the Remain side of the referendum. And in all of that time, I met very few people who were 100% for Remain or 100% for Leave in the country as a whole. For many, it was a question of balance, of acknowledging both the advantages and the disadvantages of our membership of the European Union and deciding which outweighed the other. In the end, the national balance against my campaigning tipped in favour of Leave, and that's the decision that's been made. But what we need now is not another polarised debate, but a united effort to maximise the advantages and minimise the disadvantages of our new position. And this is achievable. Negotiating a new relationship with the EU is a complex process, but the underlying principle of every successful agreement is simple, and that is mutual advantage. The whole point of trade is not to produce winners on one side and losers on the other, but benefits on both sides. That is the smart way. Anything else is the opposite. So to talk of punishment, for example, falls into the trap of seeing trade as a weapon. It also sets a terrible example in a world where smaller nations need to coexist with their larger neighbours and vice versa. Clearly, there are benefits to be had from integration within the larger economic areas, but there are benefits in differentiation too. Economies that have the freedom and the agility to specialise and to innovate have an important role to play in the wider global economy, especially when the fruits of experimentation can be shared through free trade, and also through understanding that can be gained when different places try different solutions to common challenges. Given the sheer range of potentially transformative technologies now on the horizon, the ability to learn from the successes and failures of comparable economies, it seems to me, is more important than ever. Therefore, diversity between or within nations should be seen as an opportunity, not as a threat. It's in the nature of balances that they can be upset either way. If excessive integration is to be avoided, then the same applies to the equal and opposite error. Specifically, we should not regard Brexit as an opportunity to undercut our neighbours by lowering our standards, for instance, by weakening workers' rights or environmental protections. Of course, all nations need to bear down on unnecessary burdens of doing business, pointless regulation, punitive taxation, and protectionist trade barriers. Yet there is a point at which the call for lower costs could become a call for lower standards. And that is a path that we must resist, not solely for the sake of a harmonious relationship with Europe, important though that is, but also because an attempt to undercut our neighbours would actually undercut our own standards. Britain cannot win a race to the bottom, not even if we wanted to, and we don't. Instead, the road ahead lies up. The British government is committed to an industrial strategy. It will be founded on the acknowledgement that to succeed, we need constantly to upgrade the sources of our competitiveness. For an advanced economy, the ultimate guarantee of competitiveness is not to pile it high and sell it cheap, but to do what no one else can do better, or do at all. For instance, the reason why Britain excels in financial services, we have many companies in the room tonight, the reason why we excel in financial services is not because London is the cheapest city in the world, but because nowhere else has a greater concentration of know-how. Such concentrations are underpinned by the essential foundations of an advanced economy: a world-class science and research base, leading-edge industrial sectors, a skilled and productive workforce, strong and self-confident communities, resilient, adaptable infrastructure. As a country, we've made great progress on all of these fronts, but I think we can acknowledge that it's uneven and we have further to go. We have many of the most productive companies in the world, but we still have low productivity businesses. We can boast one of the most prosperous areas in Northern Europe, in fact, the most prosperous area here in central London, but also 9 of the 10 poorest. And these aren't remote places without hope of further development, but in many cases close to our great cities, places that can be and will be more productive than they currently are. Does this matter? If the best of British business is world-class, then why care about the rest? As long as we win gold in our chosen areas of excellence, isn't that enough? Well, no, it's not nearly enough. Unlike athletics, an economy needs the elite to lead the field, not to leave it behind. If the long tail of productivity becomes too long, it risks breaking apart. The leading companies lose access to local supply chains and to potential pools of talent. Now, not every company can be a frontier company, but that doesn't mean that they can't all contribute to the success of the sectors that they belong to. And that is the same applies to different parts of the country. Some places will be bigger than others, but if we don't upgrade our skills, knowledge, and infrastructure in every community, then the most vulnerable would lose their ability to connect and contribute to the local and national economy. And so that's why the process of upgrading our economy through our industrial strategy needs to be continuous, so that we can keep up with other nations, but also consistent, so that we remain one nation. This is the challenge: to allow the best to excel while enabling the rest to connect. A strategic objective for companies as well as for countries. Now, clearly there is a lot to be learned from the strategies of successful businesses, especially those which operate across a wide range of sectors and markets. And tonight we honor Mr. Nakanishi and his remarkable leadership of one such company. When Nakanishi-san became president of Hitachi in 2010, the company had suffered several years of major losses. But in the course of his leadership, Hitachi was returned to profit. Asia House rightly describes it as one of the greatest turnarounds in corporate history. There are many lessons that we could learn from this story of success, but allow me to focus on three. First, Mr. Nakanishi's boldness of vision. The decisions that he took were commensurate with the scale of the challenge. The same today must apply to Britain's industrial strategy. At a time of change, government must and will set a clear direction for the future. As we've shown on major infrastructure decisions like Heathrow and Hinckley, that is exactly what we're doing and what we will continue to do. We can't promise decisions that will please everyone in every particular instance, but everyone will know where they stand. For those making long-term investments in this country, nothing else will do. The second lesson we can take from Nakanishi-san's experience is the importance of precisely experience. Mr. Nakanishi took the helm in 2010, but he joined the company in 1970. The decisions that he took were not just bold, they were based on 4 decades of personal experience, not to mention personal loyalty. It's hard for any outsider, no matter how accomplished, to replicate that kind of perspective. In Westminster and Whitehall, we have many experts, but in my view, the true insiders are in companies and communities across the land who have local knowledge and knowledge of their industry and of what their companies, what their industries, and what local economies need to grow and to prosper. Our strategy must therefore be written with, not just for, the innovators, the investors, and the job creators. But if this is a local industrial strategy for Britain, it's also global. And that brings me to the third lesson. The transformation of Hitachi, though informed by insider experience, was far from an inward-looking exercise. A business is nothing without customers, and Hitachi has turned to the world to find them. It has gone to where the growth is. The British economy must have a global growth strategy too, and it will. And it follows from my earlier argument that this must and will include an Asian growth strategy. We build on deep foundations, decades of industrial cooperation between Britain and Asia. And I would like to reiterate my country's gratitude to Nakanishi-san for his own invaluable contribution to building up those links. In particular, as everyone here knows, Hitachi has made and is making very important investments in the UK economy, including a 30-acre train manufacturing facility in Newton Aycliffe in County Durham, and the proposed nuclear power station at Wilver on Anglesey. It's thanks to projects like these that Japan is now the second biggest source of foreign investment in the UK. However, it is the quality and not just the quantity of that investment that stands out. A prime example, but by no means the only one, given the range of sectors represented here tonight, is in car manufacturing, for example. The British automotive sector is now the most productive in Europe, but it wasn't always. Back in the 1970s, the sector was emblematic of our status then as it was said at the time, the sick man of Europe. But rather than giving in to a narrative of decline, Margaret Thatcher embarked on a course of revival and reform. The false solutions of nationalisation and protectionism were rejected in favour of an opening to the world. In car manufacturing, this change of direction led to an ever closer relationship with great Japanese companies like Nissan, Honda, and Toyota. Those who thought the British workforce would never adapt to the Japanese culture of workplace management, or that Japan's mastery of industrial efficiency could never translate to another country, were proved decisively wrong. Far from a clash of civilizations, we have achieved a meeting of minds. And of course, the story continues. And in the last few days, we've had the latest chapter, being Nissan's decision to produce the Qashqai and the new X-Trail at its outstanding Sunderland plant. My first overseas visit as business secretary was to Japan. And one of the first big decisions I took in this role concerned the leading Japanese company, SoftBank. The issue was SoftBank's bid to buy Arm Holdings, British chip manufacturer, as everyone knows. Some people suggested that the bid should be blocked, saying that we shouldn't allow foreign ownership of one of our biggest technology companies. But this was a good deal for Britain. It's the biggest ever single investment in the UK from any Asian country, a huge vote of confidence in the British economy, and a major boost to Cambridge as a global centre of science and innovation. And so despite the historic significance of the British vote to leave the European Union, I was proud and am proud to show that Britain is open for business with trading partners from all across the world. The same goes for Chinese investment in Hinkley Point C, Indian investment in our steel and car industry, and all our trading relationships that we celebrate tonight with the nations of Asia. At a time when powerful forces seek to sow mistrust between nations and cultures, it's vital that we together demonstrate what openness and trust can achieve. The world must not be divided between rival trading blocs. So let us continue to draw East and West together as we celebrate what we have in common. Thank you very much indeed.